Hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining me here for another Facebook Live. I'm Dr. Alexis Conason and I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm in private practice here in New York City, and I'm also the founder of the Anti-Diet Plan. The Anti-Diet Plan is a 9-week program that I run live in New York City, and I'm also in the process of turning it into an online program, an online course that I'm super excited about, and I hope many of you will join me in participating. And it's all about helping you get off of the diet, overeating, self-hatred roller coaster that we get stuck on and find a way to have joy and pleasure in our bodies and to truly nourish ourselves and enjoy our relationship with food, and with ourselves and with our lives, because I really see this not just as about changing our eating. It's really about changing the way that we relate to ourselves and the way that we relate to our bodies. And it's just such a freeing experience to stop dieting and to be able to live your life without that pressure, without constantly feeling that you're not good enough. And as I've said before, I think it's a cultural issue that we are indoctrinated to believe that we're not good enough. And today we're going to be talking about the impact of diet culture and diet talk and the way that we talk about our bodies on our children. So I think this is a really important conversation. I'm really happy and excited to be talking to you about it today. I know that many women come to me seeking treatment because they're worried about passing their own food issues onto their children. I think that we tend to, if there's going to be an impetus to change, oftentimes it's our kids, because for some reason, like, we're able to give them the care and think about being able to want them to have, wanting them not to suffer with this torment that we've been suffering with. I know I certainly think about that as a mother. I think about that with my own daughter. Like, how can I raise her in a world where she doesn't grow up with the same sense of body shame and feeling not good enough that I struggled with for so many decades of my life? So I'm going to be talking about a few different research studies. So as some of you may know, I started off my career, and I still have a little bit of a foot in the world of research. I worked for a number of years in obesity research, which I can kind of summarize as saying we have absolutely no idea how to help people lose and maintain significant amounts of weight long term. That's the punchline from my many, many years of working in obesity research and being kind of immersed in all of the different studies that are going on. But I do think that research plays a role and is important in informing the way that we do things, especially when they're well done studies without conflicts of interest and without funding from the drug companies or the food industry and things like that. So I'm going to be talking about 3 different studies today that all kind of add to this general body of literature that talks about how our children soak up everything that we give them, right? Like, we may be having a conversation and think our kids don't know. I have a lot of women, both in my practice and people that I, just come across in my everyday life that, say, oh yeah, like, I really struggle with my body, but my kids have no idea. My kids don't know how I really feel about myself. Most likely they do. We may not be saying it to them, but our kids look to us and they read how we feel about ourselves. And, if anybody who is listening grew up in a home with a mother or a parent who didn't feel good about their body, and maybe there was never anything directly said, I bet you picked up on the sense that your parent felt not good enough about themselves, and I bet it affected you in some way. So we get a lot of messages, even when they're not communicated directly, even when they're kind of more implicit. So the first study I want to talk about is it's a study that came out in 2016, and it really kind of gives an overview of a little bit of what just the general impact is about parents actually talking directly to their children about their weight and their eating habits. So this is the study that's going to talk about, like a parent saying, do you really want to eat that? Are you sure you need the second helping? Don't you think you should lose, a few pounds? Or even a parent saying, that maybe you should go on a diet, or maybe you should just try to lose some weight. So this study is looking at kind of the direct impact of the impact of directly talking to your kids about their own bodies. And this study, researchers in this study actually looked at adult women who are between the ages of 20 and 35 and asked them about their experiences with the kinds of comments that their parents made to them about their weight. And they found that women whose parents made weight-related comments were far more dissatisfied with their bodies. And this was completely independent of what the women actually weighed. There was actually a direct association that found that the more that parents had commented about the child's, the now adult child's weight, the more intense the body dissatisfaction that the adult daughter felt about her own body. It was also linked with higher BMI, and as we know, dieting tends to lead to more weight gain over time. I don't think that weight is the most important thing, but it is interesting to note that a lot of this is coming from a place of a parent being concerned, and I think that most parents are well-intentioned, and a lot of us get misinformation from our doctors, from our pediatricians, who really emphasize weight and might direct a parent to, comment on their kid's weight or to put them on a diet or something like that without realizing the harmful effects that this can have. But it's important to notice that not only is this going to create body dissatisfaction in these children, it also doesn't accomplish, it has the opposite, result of accomplishing the weight loss goal. So, it means that kids are telling your kid that they need to lose weight is not going to make them lose weight. In fact, it's just going to make them feel really unhappy about their body and probably end up at a higher weight than they otherwise would. So that's the first study. By the way, these can all be found. I've written about them at various times on my Psychology Today blog, so you can find a full write-up of these studies on my blog. This one was from August 2016. I wrote about it, and the title was called "The Danger of Talking to Children About Weight." I can include the links here if people are interested. Now, the next study that I want to talk about is one that came out more recently, and it's one that I just wrote about this week on my blog, and it's called Does Criticizing Our Own Bodies Damage Our Kids' Body Image? And this one I thought was really interesting because, like I said, I think a lot of us struggle with body image, and we think our kids don't know. We say, well, I try to not talk to my kids about their weight. I think that, I see how damaged we see how damaged we were by our own parents focusing on our weight or identifying our bodies as needing to be different or smaller or restricting our food, putting us on diets at young ages. And we say, I don't want to do that to my kids. I don't want to do that. But we still struggle with our own body image issues, and we kind of just hope and kind of delude ourselves sometimes in thinking that our children don't realize. So what this study found was that that this study was looking at not parents who directly were saying to their kids, you need to lose weight, or, you know, anything about their kids' bodies, but how parents were talking about their own bodies. So the kind of, you know, kids overhearing conversations, perhaps between two parents, saying things like, you know, honey, do I look fat in this dress? Or mom's not going to have, you know, I shouldn't eat that extra helping of dessert because my belly is too big. You know, it's these secondary comments, these comments about our own bodies that we're making often in front of our kids or within earshot of our children. And I think that we often say these things so unintentionally and kind of like it can have these comments slip out often outside of our awareness, you know, like, oh, I hate the way that my thighs look in these pants, or, oh, I shouldn't have eaten that extra helping of pie at dinner. You know, I really got to start the diet plan tomorrow. So even though these are comments we're talking about our own bodies, they're not directed at our children. This research study was looking at, do those comments affect our kids? And it was specifically looking again at daughters, and they found that overhearing, you know, negative body talk, you know, between parents was actually associated with more body dissatisfaction, less body appreciation, both generally, and also children who overheard these kinds of negative comments from their parents tended to have less appreciation of their body in terms of what their bodies can do. Like, they tended to objectify their own bodies, internalize this objectification that our bodies are valued for what they look like, not for what they do. So these kids were like less likely to think like, my body's really awesome because I can run really fast, or I love my body because I can, you know, do 10 jumping jacks and it brings me, you know, joy to dance and to move and be active. These kids weren't able to appreciate the functionality of their body. All they saw was, you know, my body's not thin enough, my body isn't fit enough, and, you know, had that dissatisfaction. And interestingly, in terms of the work that I do with mindful eating, this study looks specifically at how these variables affected mindful eating, and they found that overhearing parents talking about negative comments about their own body decreased kids' ability to eat mindfully. So what this means is that as we're internalizing this idea that our body, you know, as kids, and you know, these things extended into young adulthood, but as kids were internalizing the idea that their bodies weren't good enough, they stopped listening. They stopped hearing the important signals that their body was sending them. What I call our internal GPS, our navigation system that kind of tells us and guides us in terms of making food choices, started to be tuned out as kids heard these kinds of negative comments that their parents were making about their own bodies, and how that, you know, started to impact the way that they felt about their own body, you know, how the kids started to feel about their bodies, and they started to tune out, you know. And for anyone listening, any adults listening, you probably know what I'm talking about. Like, when we're so caught up in conflict around our body and feeling like there's something wrong with our body, or our bodies aren't good enough, we can't hear that internal GPS. We can't hear the wisdom and the guidance that our body is giving us. And if you look at kids before they've gotten all screwed up by our diet culture, like if you look at very young kids, especially like under the age of 3, they hear their body's cues pretty loud. You know, it's not all about, oh, I shouldn't have that ice cream because, you know, ice cream's going to make me fat, or it's not healthy, or whatever these kinds of messed up ideas are that we start to internalize as we grow. Actually, there's some evidence that we start to internalize these ideas that fat is bad as young as 3 years old, preschoolers. But if you look at kids younger than that, they hear their body. They're just kind of like, I'm hungry. You know, look at a little baby. It doesn't matter if it is breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or 2 a.m., or, you know, in the middle of when you're doing something else. When they're hungry, they're hungry. They will let you know they need to eat. They tend not to overeat. It's almost impossible to overfeed a baby. They eat what they need, and their body just tells them, okay, that's it. I'm satisfied. I don't need any more. And they go on with their day, and the next time they're hungry, they let us know again, and they eat, and they stop when they feel satisfied, and they're just like very in tune with their bodies. And, you know, we, I think, really do a disservice by indoctrinating our children into this culture of believing that they're not good enough and that their bodies are somehow broken, and that wisdom, you know, they become disconnected from that wisdom. We all do. Well, most of us do, at least most of the people that I work with. We get very disconnected from our bodies, usually from a very young age, before we even remember. And it can make it harder to learn how to trust our bodies again, because often we don't even have the memory of the time that we could trust our bodies, the memory of the time before we started learning that our bodies were broken or that our bodies weren't good enough. And we're able to like just trust that like hunger and fullness were natural cues. We'd eat when we were hungry. We would stop when we'd have enough. We'd eat what we wanted. Our body would get what it needed. It wasn't all of this conflict. So those are two research studies that show both the ways that our children take in the comments that we make directly to them, that have been proven, and that's been shown. These are just a few studies, but this has been shown really over and over again in the research, that make directly talking about a kid's weight or commenting on their body in a negative way is going to be a big predictor for body image dissatisfaction and disordered eating down the line. In fact, one of the biggest predictors, most consistent predictors for eating, developing an eating disorder later on in life is weight-based teasing, and that is primarily, I believe, the number one source of weight-based teasing in childhood is parents and family members. So it's really important that we think about what we, say to our children, not only about their own bodies, but also what we say about our bodies, about, the kinds of comments we make about ourselves. And the last study I want to talk about really delves into what I think is interesting is not just the way that, we pass diet culture from, from us to our children, but that the way that diet culture is actually perpetuated through different generations. So there was a study that came out also this year in 2018. It was a longitudinal study, which means that they examined people starting from when they were adolescents, and they followed them over the course of 15 years. And by the end of the study, some of these adolescents 15 years later were now adults and parents. And what they found was that we are, having comments about your weight, like a parent making comments about your own weight and your eating, and also parents making comments about their own bodies, affects not only your children, not only their children, but like their children. So it can go, this study followed it through 3 generations, right? 3 generations. It was passed from parent to child to grandchild. The idea of body dissatisfaction, more unhealthy weight-related behaviors, which includes both dieting, binge eating, and other kinds of unhealthy weight control. So, restriction, perhaps purging. All of these things were really increased, not just in one generation, but in at least 3 generations. So what this is saying is that there's an, intergenerational transmission of diet culture. So if you struggle, if you many of us who struggle with not feeling good enough about our bodies, we learned this from our parents, like this, and not because they're bad people or because they were trying to harm us in any way, but probably because that's what they learned from their parents, or that's what they heard from their pediatrician. We're all immersed in diet culture, so we're doing the best that we can, and sometimes we just don't know any better. And the best that we can, we think that we're helping our kids by making these comments about their body or about their weight. We, are really under the belief that being at a higher weight is so detrimental for our health, that we are trying to help our kids. Like, I really do believe that most parents, not all, but most parents do want the best for our kids. So sometimes unintentionally, in doing what we think is best for our kids, we're perpetuating diet culture and passing these messages down, not only to our own children, but that perhaps they will pass down to their children, just as we've gotten these messages from our parents, and we may be passing them along to our children. So I know that most people out there watching, like, we don't want our children to suffer the way that we did. We don't want children to feel not good enough about their bodies. We don't want children to feel that their self-worth is defined by the numbers on the scale or the size of their pants, or to feel, that their life's work is to mold their body into what some arbitrary societal ideal, tells us we want to look like. Like, we want so much more for our kids. I don't know about you guys, like I do as a mom. I want a lot more for my daughter than to grow up believing that, her value is defined by her size. I never want her to feel like she's not good enough in this core fundamental way that we do when we're immersed in diet culture. So I think, in many ways, the change starts with us, because kids are hearing what we're saying. So I really think that if we want to break the cycle, we have to be very cautious about what we're saying to our children and what we're saying in front of our children about our bodies. And I think we need to work on resolving, some of the conflict and feeling better in our bodies with us. I think that's the most powerful thing that we can do to break the cycle, because even if we try to, yes, it is number one, a great step to obviously not directly say anything to your kids that is, making them feel shamed about their weight or making them feel that their body's bad in any way. It's definitely good to avoid saying, any negative comments about your own body in front of your kids. But I still think that if we are immersed in self-hatred and we feel so terribly about our bodies, I wouldn't be surprised if our kids, somehow are still picking up on it. Kids are intuitive. I just think they get these things. So I really hope that, you can make it a priority for yourself to work on changing your own relationship with your body. And that in turn is one of the most powerful and meaningful things that you can do to help your children have a better relationship with their own bodies. So let's break that cycle. Let's start to raise a generation of kids who feel, who are not immersed in diet culture, who grow up to challenge and maybe change diet culture. Maybe they will be the generation to say enough and to really make headway into changing what has been a very entrenched part of our culture, and they will change the systems and free themselves to being able to live lives that are so much fuller than what diet culture allows us to do. So that is my hope for the next generation, and I think it starts with us. So if you want to learn more about me and my work and mindful eating and the anti-diet plan and how to start, breaking free from diet culture and developing a more peaceful and compassionate relationship with our bodies that hopefully will get passed down to our children and their children and their children, and our world will look very different. So if you're interested in starting to look at a different way of eating and relating to our body, do check out the anti-diet plan program. I offer a free 30-day starter course that's available on my website, drconison.com. You can follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram at the Anti-Diet Plan, Twitter at Conison Psy.D, and Facebook right here. You should see it up on the link, Alexis Conison Psy.D. And on a closing note, I just want to say I'm, talking about this because I think that not to make people afraid or to, kind of feel hopeless, but I'm talking about this because I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunities here of things that we can do and ways that we can intervene to really raise a generation of kids that think so differently about their body and don't struggle with the epidemic of self-hatred and body image dissatisfaction and disordered eating that we see in our culture today. I don't know if I've mentioned, but upwards of 91% of women feel dissatisfied with their body. So there's a lot of room to make that change. It's not easy. I'm not going to promise you that it's an easy change to make, but it is possible. I've seen it with myself. I've seen it with my clients, and there's a whole community of anti-dieting activists, fat positive, fat acceptance activists, people involved in the health at every size movement, people involved in intuitive eating. Like, there's support out there, and there's a different way of doing things. So I hope you'll join us and join our community in ending diet culture and really finding a way to live in peace and love with ourselves. And I think that's going to create a really seismic shift in our culture. So anyways, thank you all for joining me today. I'll be back next week, Wednesday at noon with a new topic. If there's anything you want to hear about, please let me know. And I love to hear from you. Please stay connected. You can also email me info@drconison.com. I hope I'll see you all next week. Thanks so much.